the Executive Director of Canadian Hemophilia Society for well over 15 years. That gives him the opportunity not only to bring in his personal experience, but also the experience of working with both the board, the medical teams, and our various medical groups, as well as researchers here in Canada and internationally as well. So David, that's my quick introduction, and look forward to your presentation.
Thanks, Matthew. Thanks for the invitation to present, and a special thanks for putting my photograph from 2001 instead of from recently. It was much better. So I've titled this A Brave New World. In fact, that was the title of our symposium 2 weeks ago in Toronto for Rendezvous, where we had several presentations on the future of treatments. I don't know how many of you have read Aldous Huxley's book, but it was a book about drugs and a perfect world. It wasn't actually perfect, and so you know, I think it's a fitting title for a period in which we're moving into a whole new area of different kinds of therapies for hemophilia A and B and other bleeding disorders. And I think it probably takes some courage on the part of people who are experimenting with those drugs and being part of the clinical trials. So I've divided my presentation into about 6 or 7 parts, and I'll be stopping, time permitting, after each of the sections so that people can ask their questions, and we can not leave things right till the end, and also not to make this a long monologue. Do have some disclosures first. Not a doctor, not a scientist. I have no intention of making any recommendations on treatments, and I really don't have any bias for one company over another. I probably do have some preferences in terms of particular treatments, but I'll try to keep those to myself and be as objective as possible. So with that said, here are the sections of the talk. So we'll just go over what today's marketplace looks like in terms of clotting factor concentrates. A bit of a word on clinical trials and how they work, and how products get approved. Looking to the future, some of the non-factor therapies, the non-clotting factor concentrate therapies that are coming along and showing great promise. Gene therapy as well, and you know, we even have some experience here in Canada with patients experimenting with gene therapy. And there's some really far out radical developments as well, which aren't clotting factor concentrates and really are really out there. And probably maybe the most important part of the talk is the whole reimbursement process. I know these products may be licensed and hopefully will be licensed, but who's going to pay for them, and will they be paid for? And that's allows me to conclude by talking about the importance of data. So today's factor market, which has really changed immensely over the last 5 or 6 years. One of the big things that's changed is the cost of clotting factor concentrates, and they're much lower now than they were, say, 5 or 6 years ago. And one of the reasons is how the manufacturing process has been streamlined. But there are some other reasons as well. A lot of the factor concentrates that we know, for example, Covaltry, which is the successor to cogenate, which is the successor to a previous version of cogenate, Advate, which used to be recombinate. These were all developed over 20 years ago, perhaps 25 years ago now. And the R&D costs, the research and development costs for these have been reimbursed many times over. So the companies have really made a lot of money with these products, and now can afford to perhaps compete and reduce the prices. In addition, many of the patents on these products have expired. So these were 20-year patents, and now companies can copy some of the processes that these first 2 companies used, and that allows them to develop their own products at a cheaper price. We've also gone from probably a few 100 million units of recombinant factor VIII back in the 90s to now 12 billion units recombinant factor VIII being produced. So it's economy of scale there. Much more product is being developed, not only for the developed world, but also even for the developing world. And there's many more products, and so there's a lot more competition, and competition has driven prices down. We thought this would happen much earlier, but it's really taken 25 years for this to happen. And probably in Canada, the most important reason for the prices to fall is that as of say 3 years ago, switching is now possible. So people can switch from say coagulate to advate to eloctate, and there's no fear now of developing inhibitors. That was the fear for many years, and that really froze the market. And so the two companies that had the market could just charge whatever price they want because they knew that people weren't going to be switching to another product. So now with the tenders that happened in 2016, I guess the last one, no, 2014, the last one, now suddenly it's an open ball game. Anybody can bid, and price becomes a much bigger element. So all of those factors have driven down prices. Here's an idea of how much they've gone down. So if you look in the first 13 years of the century, products were over $1 a unit, even $1.25 a unit. With the contract in 2013, they've fallen to much below $1 a unit. And now I'd say they're anywhere between 30 cents and 70 cents per IU. This is not just in Canada, but wherever there is a competitive tender in place, such as in the UK and Australia and Ireland, that's what's really driven down the prices. And we're now starting to see the same thing with recombinant factor IX, which was very close to $1 a unit for the last 20 years, and now we've seen it fall from say 75 cents several years ago to some areas of the world where it's down to 35 cents a unit. So that's it's perhaps either half the price they used to be, or in some cases maybe even a quarter the price of these products used to be. And this is a good thing in many ways. It's a good thing because it's much less pressure on for CBS and Hemophilia to try to restrict utilization. And I think it's also eased up prescribing. So a lot of physicians are prescribing much more aggressive prophylactic regimes because they see the price has gone down so much. And this has led to huge savings for CBS. I call it CBS land, as opposed to my province, Quebec, where we have a separate blood system and supplier. So that those first contracts back in the 2013 to 2016 period saved CBS $50 to $70 million per year just for factor VIII, and then they hope to save about that same amount in the next round of contracts, which began in 2016, and they are saving probably $30 to $40 million per year for factor VIII. And at the same time, we have access to extended half-life recombinant factor VIII and IX, so that's good. So really the market's gone from maybe $200 million a year for recombinant factor VIII down to maybe $100 million a year. In Quebec, smaller savings, of course, but we've seen the same thing when Quebec switched from coagulate to helixate back in 2008, and then again when it switched to Zinfa in 2015. So big savings in Quebec as well, and now they've just switched to Rexubis for factor IX, and again about savings of $4 million per year. At the same time, as I mentioned before, prices have gone down by say 50%, but utilization has gone up quite a bit as well. So recombinant factor VIII increased by 32% over the last 5 years, and recombinant factor IX has increased by 40% over the last 5 years. They were pretty stable before that, until 2012 or 2013, the increases were only 1 or 2% per year on average. And why is this? Well, first, there are more patients being born. Smaller patients are getting bigger, and bigger patients use more factor VIII and IX. There's probably more prophylaxis, which is a good thing, and higher doses of prophylaxis. I've said for many years 1% as a trough level, 1% is not enough for many people. And then as people have gotten older and joint disease has I think, become more important in our thinking, there's been probably more surgeries, and surgeries take quite a bit of a factor. So despite these savings, unfortunately, there's been no reinvestment of these savings in care. So our hemophilia treatment centers haven't gotten more money. The Canadian Bleeding Disorder Registry so far has not gotten any money. We're working on that, and so all that money has been plowed back into the general healthcare system and used for other things. On an individual basis, the cost per year for an adult of, say, 70 kilos on a standard prophylaxis regimen, factor VIII is now down to about $70,000 to $94,000 a year. And factor VIII is a bit more expensive, maybe $81,000 to $108,000 a year. So that's half of what it was a few years ago. These are the products that are currently approved in Canada, and I'm showing you the market shares in CBS land and in the Quebec land. So as you probably know, Kovaltry and Zinta have the lion's share of the market in the 9 provinces served by CBS. But Eloctate, and I'm pleased about this because it's an extended half-life product, has taken about 15 to 20% of the market over the last year, and that exceeds expectations. In Hemophilia, Eloctate has been restricted to very special cases, and so it's only a few patients using the extended half-life product. And Zinta has by far the lion's share of the market. Advate still has a share of the market, even though it doesn't. It's not on the market in the rest of the country. And then there are some other products that haven't gotten any share of the market yet, and that's NovoEight and FVIII. These are new well, certainly FVIII has just recently been introduced. It may get a share of the market in the upcoming tender. If you look at factor VIII, von Willebrand factor, this is a plasma-derived product. There are 2 products on the market, and in the, I think that's a mistake here. I'm sorry. In the area run by CBS, it's really 50% for Hemophilia and 50% for Willebrand, half and half. And in Hemophilia territory, it's all Hemophilia. So I've got to fix those slides. And these products, these plasma-derived products, are used for Hemophilia A, for previously untreated patients who have just been diagnosed to avoid inhibitors, also used in immune tolerance, and for von Willebrand disease. The factor IX products on the market, there's 5 of them now. It's really expanded greatly. Another one coming soon. So Benefix has about 65% of the CBS market, and Alprolix, surprisingly, has taken about 30% of the market just in the last year. And plasma-derived Immunine still has a small share. In Quebec, it's completely different. Rexubis has just taken about 85% of the market, and plasma-derived Immunine still has a small percentage. So we do have a website which keeps all of these products up to date. So you can go to the address that you see there, and you have all the products on the market in these different categories. So factor VIII, von Willebrand factor, factor IX, plasma-derived factor IX, all the inhibitor products, and then there's a number of products to treat rare factor deficiencies. So we keep those up to date every 2 months or so. So it's that information is there for you at all times. So that's sort of the current situation. So I'll stop there and see if there's any questions before moving on. Are you still with me, Matthew? So I'm just getting static here. I don't know if you can hear me.
There we go. Sorry, David.
There you are. Yeah.
Does anyone have a question that they want to ask at this point? Well, why don't we carry forward then, David? And again, feel free to enter your question in the chat. as we go through the various sections.
So in a few minutes, we'll be looking at regulators, and we'll talk about who they are in a second. They can grant fast track or priority review status to drugs to treat serious conditions with unmet needs. So normally a regular review is about 300 days, but a priority review for a really exciting drug that may really solve an unmet need can be done in half that time. So the three regulators, perhaps, that I follow the most closely are the European Medicines Agency, and they approve drugs for Europe. The Food and Drug Administration, the infamous FDA, approves drugs for the US, and Health Canada approves drugs for Canada. So we can only use drugs here in Canada that are approved by Health Canada. It's interesting to see them approved elsewhere, and sometimes encouraging, reassuring, but those regulators have no jurisdiction in Canada. This is the process that a new therapy or new drug will go through. First, preclinical studies. So this is done in the lab or with animals, and really to test the safety and efficacy. And then a phase 1 trial is done with a small number of humans, first to see whether a new drug is safe. Now, because hemophilia and bleeding disorders are quite rare, and you don't have thousands of people to do trials on, the companies tend to do a phase 1 and 2 trial together. So it's often called a phase 1-2 trial. And so they'll look at both the safety of the drug and whether it's efficacious, whether it meets the end point in terms of doing the job it's supposed to do. And these are small numbers of people. Usually 15 to 20 people would be in a phase 1 or 2 trial for hemophilia drugs. And if they're successful in phase 1 and 2, if they're shown to be safe and efficacious, if they're doing what they're supposed to do, then they move on to a phase 3 trial, which is a lot larger. And they tend to be between 100 and 150 people in the drugs that we're talking about. And they test whether it's safe and efficacious, as they did in phase 1 and 2, but they also compare it to existing drugs. Is it as good as or better than existing drugs? And if it gets licensed, and then there's a phase 4, which is post-marketing trials. And these are studies that are continued after the drug has been commercially marketed, and this is to get more data and to confirm the results of the trials with more people. This is how long it takes. So a preclinical study could be 5 or 10 years in the making, and these are in the lab with mice, with rabbits, with dogs, before they move into humans. Phase 1 could be 1 to 2 years. Phase 1 and 2 together could be 1 to 2 years. And then the phase 3 trial is usually about a year. Plus, there's often a year of data analysis and preparation of a submission before the submission actually goes to the regulator. When it gets to Health Canada, a normal review is 300 days. If there's questions that they have, they go back to the company and the clock stops. And it only starts again when all the questions have been answered to their satisfaction. So if all those questions are answered, if it's safe and efficacious and it compares favorably to existing drugs, then Health Canada says you have a notice of compliance. And it can be marketed. But it's, as you know, hemophilia drugs are very expensive. You can't go to the local pharmacy and buy it. You can't pay for it yourself. Someone has to pay for it. And we'll come back to that at the end of the session when we talk about reimbursement. In other words, who's going to pay for the drug so that patients can have access. This is another clinicaltrials.gov is an excellent website which has a registry of all of the clinical trials in the world that have been approved by the major regulators. So you can go and search by condition. So you type in hemophilia, type in other terms such as hemophilia A, you might type in inhibitors and the country, and you'll get a list of all of the clinical trials that are ongoing, and they'll tell you what the inclusion, where it stands in terms of the phase, whether what the inclusion criteria are for the participants, the exclusion criteria, and they may even tell you where the trials are being conducted. And so the CHS website also has a section. Oh. Okay, and the computer is talking to me. The CHS website has a section called Products in the Pipeline, and these are all the products which may come to the market here in Canada. And they're the ones that are in human trials, so phase 1 to 3. And we have 4 different categories. There's the factor concentrates, so factors 1 to 13 and von Willebrand factor. The products for inhibitor patients, the non-factor coagulation products, which I'll be talking about in a minute, and gene therapy. So there's a fair amount of information there, and again, that's updated every 2 months or so, and it talks about how these trials are coming along, what the results are. Gives you sort of a minimum of information to follow. I think that's the end of the section on clinical trials, so again, I'll stop and see if there are any questions.
So your microphones are off mute. If you have a question, please go ahead and ask your question directly to David.
I think they want the exciting stuff, which is coming up now.
Okay.
So, and the other one is the Emicizumab monoclonal antibody, which may be replacing factor VIII. And they're very different. And that's important to remember when we come to the discussion on reimbursement, because nobody can say that Emicizumab is like factor VIII. It's not like factor VIII at all. Recombinant factor VIII is very much like plasma-derived factor VIII, and we can make that argument that CBS should distribute it, but that argument may be more difficult to make with Emicizumab. So this is a graph. I'm sure you all understand how this works, along with maybe 10 other people in all of Canada. I don't understand how it works, but this is the coagulation cascade. And there are actually 2 pathways, sort of the intrinsic pathway, which has a lot of the clotting factor proteins, and an extrinsic pathway, which has some other different things like tissue factor, antithrombin, etc. What's important to note is that Emicizumab, which we're talking about, it interacts just like factor VIII. And here's, perhaps here's another example of what the coagulation cascade does. If one of these factor proteins, if one of these elements in the cascade is missing, as you see in the bottom diagram, the coagulation cascade stops and clotting doesn't take place. It was a Japanese company that developed Emicizumab. It used to be called ACE910. That's why you see all these Japanese characters here. I think it's the picture down at the bottom here, where you have the bias. This is a picture of ACE910 or Emicizumab, and it grabs onto factor 9A and factor 10, just like factor VIII does. You see factor VIII up here, and so it plays exactly the same role that factor VIII plays, but it plays it in a slightly different manner. And I'm actually not qualified to give you any more information than that, except to say that it's very much like, its function is very much like factor VIII. So this was developed by Chugai and then taken over by Genentech and Roche, which is a major pharmaceutical company. And they've been running a phase 3 study over 100 patients, and these are patients with inhibitors. So they had several arms of that study, prophylaxis and on-demand. What's really interesting is that this is not an IV infusion, this is a subcutaneous infusion. And the frequency is quite low. So it could be 7 to 14 days and even less if the doses are big. So we just saw some results this week with inhibitor patients. So a dramatic drop in the number of bleeds compared to their previous treatment. 60% of these patients had no bleeds in the 31 weeks that they were being studied. So that's, for an inhibitor patient, that is really quite incredible. But, nothing is free in this world. And there were some adverse reactions, serious adverse reactions. So there were 5 cases of thrombosis. These are blood clots, which are happening in the wrong place. They're happening in the bloodstream, as opposed to, where they're trying to stop a bleed. And these were patients who had breakthrough bleeds, and then they were simultaneously treated with FVIII, which is a treatment for inhibitors, to stop the bleed. There have been no cases of thrombosis with people who either didn't receive another treatment or who received niastase, which is factor VIIa. So this is something that they're certainly following very carefully. If there are serious cases of thrombosis, that could be something that could be a big impediment to this product going forward. But so far, the clinical trials are continuing. And then they're just about to start another clinical trial with patients with hemophilia A who don't have inhibitors. So this would be the first subcutaneous therapy for people who don't have, who just have regular hemophilia A. Where does it stand in the licensure pathway? Well, the submission to Health Canada is probably going to happen later this year, so autumn 2017, and they're expecting approval within a year or less. So this could be approved for use with inhibitor patients within a year and a bit. So it's quite close. Without inhibitors, it's going to be probably 1 year later. So it'll be following with their clinical trials 1 year later, and so we could see this available by late 2019 or early 2020. Now the second one is called Fitusiran. This is also quite exciting. So this is a picture of, I guess, a balance beam, and when you give too much anticoagulant, or you don't have enough coagulant, like in hemophilia, you tend to have favoring blood to be in the fluid state, and you have more bleeding. On the other hand, if you give more procoagulant, things that make blood clot, or lots of factor, for example, then you can push the balance the other way and favor clot formation. So this is the situation for people with hemophilia. They don't have enough coagulant. They don't clot enough. So the idea here is that if you remove some of the anticoagulant here, you can try to rebalance the hemostasis thrombosis balance. Again, Fitusiran would work here to down-regulate antithrombin. Antithrombin stops clotting. So if you lower the antithrombin, and even if you don't give factor VIII or factor IX, you could increase clotting in this way. So the company is called Alnylam, works with Genzyme, and this is a therapeutic agent based on RNA interference, and it's the RNA that interferes with the antithrombin. It's again administered subcutaneously, only once a month, and because it rebalances the hemostatic system, it can be used in many bleeding disorders, not just factor VIII and factor IX, but also von Willebrand disease, some of the rare factor deficiencies. As I said before, it works to rebalance hemostasis by down-regulating antithrombin, which is an anticoagulant. And that stimulates the production of thrombin, improves clotting. So there's a phase 1 study with 16 patients, hemophilia A or B, with inhibitors, and 9 of 16 patients had no bleeds at all compared to a median of 31 the year before. So when they were being treated with their previous products, were probably FVIII, factor VIIa, 31 bleeds per year, and half the patients on this product had no bleeds in a year. And very encouraging, no signs of thrombosis in these people, even if they were treated with FVIII for a breakthrough bleed. And overall, it gave about an 85% reduction in the annual bleed rates in patients with hemophilia A and B. Okay, so again, there are several other therapies of this type, the anti-tissue factor pathway inhibitors. But those are, I think, the two most interesting for the moment, and the two that are probably closest to being approved. So again, I'll stop there and give people a chance to ask a question if they have one, and I'll catch my breath.
Hi, does anyone have a question? So David, neither of those products would be considered a recombinant product, or they're really two very different mechanisms, right?
They would be considered a biological product. They would be considered an alternative to recombinant factor concentrate. They're not clotting factor concentrates. One is an antibody, a monoclonal antibody. A lot of those exist already and for other conditions. And the second one, I think, was based on seaweed, so it's something that's been extracted from seaweed. So these are, they have a very different mechanism of action. They're not a replacement therapy like factor VIII and factor IX. So they're a real new animal, and how our health system is going to treat that remains to be seen.
So you mentioned also, as we went through the various phases, and I realize it's kind of a mystery about how the cost of a product is determined. But at what point does a company start to say, yeah, we know what this is going to cost in the market?
It's actually quite simple how they price a product. They price it at what the market will bear. And I think today, the word out there from governments is we don't want to increase costs. So if you see the extended half-life factor concentrates that were brought in, I think they were brought in at a somewhat competitive price to the existing therapies. And I think probably these new products will have to try to be competitive. If they can be the same cost and be much better and sweep the market, I think we would be happy and they would be happy.
Okay.
But it may be problematic. They come in at twice the cost per patient per year. That may not fly.
Anyone else? Any questions?
So, Matthew, I'll move on to gene therapy, which again is another exciting field. And those of you who have been following gene therapy, like I have been hearing since probably 1990, ever since they cloned factor VIII and factor IX, that it was only 5 years away. Now, when you listen to people who really know what they're talking about, it really is only 5 years away. And the proof of that is that, and I'll show you some of the results, we're in clinical trials, very seriously into clinical trials. So just a picture to show you how that works. The vehicle that is used to deliver the factor VIII gene is called a vector, and in the case of the one I'll be showing you, it's an adeno-associated virus vector. So it's a vector which has no negative effect on people. Many people have been exposed to it for many years. And then what they do is they take that vector, insert the gene into the vector, insert it into a vein just like factor VIII, just a simple infusion, and it travels into the liver and gets into the nucleus of cells in the liver and starts making factor VIII on a permanent basis. This particular therapy can only be used with people who haven't been exposed to that vector before, that virus before. So it may not be for everybody. I think about 40% of the population has been exposed to the adeno-associated vector virus before. So they'll need a different kind of vector or a different kind of virus. But 60% of people could work with them. And so the really exciting one, which was announced just under a year ago, is the study from BioMarin. Only a very small number of subjects so far, 7 adults, all with severe factor VIII, and they received just one single IV infusion of this adeno-associated virus 5 vector with the gene. Because it was quite a big dose of the vector, and they expected an immune reaction to the vector, everybody was given a short course of steroids so that they would accept this virus into their bodies, and it would be able to get to the liver and start doing its work. The really amazing data is now we're up to almost a year after infusion. One of the subjects, his levels are at 16%, 2 at 50%, 2 at 150%, and 2 subjects were well over 200% of expression of factor VIII. In other words, they had twice the normal levels. This was way more than expected. It's a bit of a problem because it's a bit too high. So they'll be doing some phase 2B trial later this year, and they'll probably just lower the dose a little bit and see if they can get something, pretty standard, close to 50%, as opposed to an overdose like this. But until this year, they were struggling to get even 5% expression of factor VIII. So this was just a huge step forward. This will take some time yet to be perfected, but it's they've shown proof of concept here. Gene therapy in hemophilia B is actually moving quite a bit faster. It's a much smaller gene, so it's easier to get the gene delivered into the liver, and you can use much smaller doses of the viral vector. Now I show you a picture from Padua, Italy, and you wonder why, I'm sure, unless you've been following the research. Well, they discovered, I don't think it's this particular man, but they discovered a family of men in Padua whose factor IX levels were all around 700%, so 7 times the level of normal. And these people were having thrombotic issues because they were clotting too much. So somebody had the brilliant idea to use their gene and use that one to insert into the viral vector. And so you have a gene which is 7 times more potent than than a normal gene. So that's what they did, and this is the trial from Spark associated with Pfizer. So far we have 10 subjects involved, all severe or moderately severe factor IX. Again, a single infusion of an AAV vector with the factor IX gene. Out of the 10, 8 of them did not need any kind of steroids. There was no immune reaction whatsoever to the vector, which is good. 2 of the subjects had an immune reaction, and they quickly treated them with steroids. And these patients now, all 10 of them, are almost up to a year after infusion, and they're all between 20 and 40%, which is a nice level. It's not normal, but it's a level of very mild hemophilia at which people don't bleed very much. In fact, these patients have not had many bleeds at all since they had the infusion. And that'll be moving quickly into a phase 3 trial. So no changes to the trial. So this one could be sooner than 5 years. And just to mention, I think there are 4 Canadians, all from Ontario, all from Toronto, or the Toronto region, who are in this group of 10. So Canadians were very prominent in the trial. They were at St. Mike's. Okay, I'm going to keep going because I think we may run out of time. We'll keep some time for the end. Some really radical developments. This is sort of a neat one. They're called DNA microbubbles. So rather than deliver the factor IX gene with a viral vector, they've found this way of using microbubbles of DNA. They deposit the gene inside those. They get deposited in the liver, and then they use ultrasound to burst the bubble, and the factor IX gene is delivered. So they get around the problem of using a viral vector which has its immune issues. So this has been successfully done in mice, so it's still preclinical. I like this one too. they've managed to genetically modify lettuce so that contains factor 8 or 9. So I guess you can ingest the lettuce in a nice salad, or perhaps in some kind of concentrate. Now, this does not get very much of the 8 or 9 into the bloodstream, so it's probably not a therapy like we know, a replacement therapy. But it could be used in pregnant women who may have a child with hemophilia, or in newborns, and the idea is that you would expose them through the gut to factor 8 or 9, and the research in dogs shows that it really reduces the risk of inhibitors in dogs. In fact, 32 times less in control dogs. So this may be a way of getting around, of reducing the risk of inhibitors by eating genetically modified lettuce. And then another one, which we've all been dreaming about for many years, is the pill. And so again, this is a way of packaging the factor 9 and putting it inside a polymer hydrogel microcarrier system that gets through the stomach, not degraded, so the drug is protected, and gets into the small intestine where the drug is released, and from there it gets into the bloodstream. So this may be a way of delivering factor 8 or factor 9 by a pill instead of by IV. Okay, moving on to the reimbursement process. So until about 3 or 4 years ago, anytime a new product came along and it was approved by Health Canada, I'm not talking about hemophilia products, CBS would create a review committee made up of CBS management. Patients were often invited, a physician or two were invited, other experts, and we reviewed Coagulate FS, we reviewed ADVAIT, we reviewed Xintha, looked at all the science. And the whole process took maybe 1 or 2 months, and immediately the product was made available on the Canadian market through CBS or Hemo-Quebec. So it was a very efficient product. We never really had to wait very long for a product to be marketed. That all changed in about 2014. Now, when a new brand comes along, and by new brand I mean something which is a factor 8, just like the other factor 8s, no significant difference. So I would say that Nuvik and Kovaltry and Astyla, which are now on the market, these basically have the same half-life as ADVAIT or Xintha. They're not really different in any way. You might call them a Me Too drug. So these can get reviewed by a CBS committee and added to the CBS formulary for distribution, but they have to go through the RFP process, the request for proposal process, which takes place every 2 or 3 years. So, for example, Astyla has been licensed, I think, probably for a year now, but is only going to have a chance to come to the market if they win a share of the market through the tender process. So that tender process is pretty well a brand new thing. It started in 2013 or 2014. But then there are drugs which are considered new categories of factor concentrate or of hemophilia therapy. So these are new categories or drugs which have a different mechanism of action. And certainly Emicizumab and Fitusiran have a different mechanism of action, or which have a big budget impact. So they are referred to the Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technologies in Health, called CADTH, and they undergo a health technology assessment. In other words, they're looked at, they're reviewed to see whether they have any kind of health outcome benefit over existing drugs. And if it's recommended that they do have a benefit, then the Provincial Territorial Blood Liaison Committee, and this is the committee of bureaucrats that oversees CBS, they decide whether they should be included on the CBS formulary, in other words, funded like our current factor 8 and 9, or it could be funded through another public or private insurance mechanism. And so there are several drugs which are actually blood products which are not funded through CBS. They're funded by your own private insurance if you have private insurance, or they're funded through public insurance if you don't. And they're purchased through hospitals or through purchasing mechanisms. And so that's a completely different way of funding or reimbursing a drug. So if that were the case today, say for factor VIII, which costs $100,000 a year, I know my own private health insurance would pay 80%. I wouldn't pay the 20%. I'd have to pay the 20% out of my pocket. So this other different way of reimbursing drugs, to my mind anyway, is not nearly as good as what we have through the blood system, where because these drugs were made from plasma and blood, have always been free to the end user. So this is what happened with Eloctate and Alprolix. They were approved in 2014. CADTH took over a year to make their recommendation. Then there were contract negotiations, and finally they became available in March of 2016. So it took almost 2 years from the time Health Canada approved for patients to get access to these products. And in Quebec, the health technology assessment and the tender process led to the conclusion that they were no better than the current drugs and more expensive, and therefore there's only a very small number of patients who can get access to them based on very restrictive criteria. And when we have to understand that for the provinces and territories, their instructions are to stop any increase in drug costs, and if you can, make them cheaper. That's what we're dealing with. So the innovative therapies, the ones I talked to you about, Emicizumab, will they undergo a CADTH health technology assessment? For sure, undoubtedly. Will they be recommended for reimbursement? I hope so. I think they should be for obviously for inhibitor patients, but we'll see. It depends. And then will the PTBLC instruct CBS to reimburse these products in the same way they reimburse factor products, or will they be reimbursed like other pharmaceuticals? Very good question. We don't know the answer to that. I think it's probably one of the major challenges for CHS over the next year is to do everything we can to make sure these drugs are easily available to everybody who needs them at no cost. And that brings me to the last section, which is the importance of data. So I know you've all heard about CBDR and MyCBDR. Hopefully a lot of you are using it already if you're on home care. So 15 of the 23 treatment centers are now live with CBDR. 2 more use a different system in BC called iChip. So 752 patients are registered with MyCBDR. I guess that's about 60% of the patients on home care in the country. Probably about 1,200 patients on home care. And then there are about 3,700 patients registered with CBDR. These are patients who don't use home infusion, so they would register when they go to the Hemophilia Treatment Center. 64,000 infusion reports have been collected by CBDR in the last year. And 90% of those were sent by patients through MyCBDR. So I think the success of CBDR, if we can get to 95% of infusion reports being sent by patients, that will be key to making the case for access to innovative therapies. If we can show that we have excellent reporting to show what the health outcomes really are, and that physicians and nurses can closely monitor and know how these products are working, intervene when they need to, that's an argument that we can use to say, now bring in these new products and make them available in the same way, and we'll also report them in the same way. The benefits, I won't go over the first 5. I think you probably know what these are. These are, I think, benefits to us as patients. But the last one is probably the important one in terms of what we're talking about tonight. Proof to the payers that these products are well monitored and that they work. One last thing, PROBE. PROBE stands for Patient-Reported Outcomes, Burdens, and Experiences. It's a patient-initiated research study collecting patient-reported data. And we're talking about things such as a patient's socioeconomic situation, the treatments they use, acute and chronic pain, impact of hemophilia on activities of daily living, joint health, quality of life, etc. The whole point of this study is to collect data from countries around the world in large numbers so that we can use the data to help advocacy. In other words, to help make the case for improved care. And so we have been involved, CHS was involved in administering this study in meetings in phase 1 and 2, which were really the experimental phases of the study. In 2017, we've been moving into the phase 3, which is really the data collection phase of probe. We're hoping that this will be administered through CBDR. So once a year, people could just get the study on their home computer through CBDR and report anonymously that way. And that's the public address website. It's now up and running, so you can go to probestudy.org and find out all about how the probe study works. So MyCBDR and probe, I think, are two ways that we can that all patients can contribute to better care, to research, and to better access to care. And that's the end of my official presentation. So I hope there are some questions.
Everyone, you're welcome to ask your questions by way of your microphone, or as well, you can make use of the chat area over on the left-hand side, the right-hand side of your screen.
I hope they're still there.
They are still there. They are still there.
They're shy.
I guess, David, you had mentioned a website previously. So how can someone track what's happening for a particular product, or if I'm looking for the treatment that I'm waiting for?
Right. So I would go to the products in the pipeline section on our website. I think it's under safe and secure supply, and then the second level is products in the pipeline, and then you can choose the category that you're interested in, and see pretty up-to-date information as to where the clinical trials stand.
Okay. Is there any more questions from anyone?
People may be trying to talk and it's not working, so they probably should type the message or the question.
Well, David,
I'm going to conclude that it was so clear, all the questions were answered.
I think so. So again, everyone, thank you for joining us this evening. We have been recording this conversation in this webinar, and you will be able to find it posted on Hemophilia Ontario's YouTube channel. Again, thanks for joining us this evening, and good night.
Thanks, everybody.